Hello, friends and tribe. Welcome to Brother Owl's Garden, where I'm very delighted to welcome back for his second appearance, Peter Panagore. Welcome, Peter, and thank you.
Brother Owl, I'm pleased to be here. And we were just talking about your nickname, Brother Owl, and how
Yeah.
that came about and the dream vision that you had
Mhm.
and the appearance of this small white owl that whom you love and how psychics have seen your face changing into a white owl. And I've been thinking a lot about guides. People get guides and they see in near death community, they see Jesus or Kali or Buddha and or no being at all. And then in other people see they have visions of loved ones coming to them or angels coming to them to guide them. Some people even see Jesus coming to them with in a dream vision. You have an owl, and I have this idea, and I can't prove this idea, but I have this idea that in every manifestation that we see as a vision that comes to us as a guide is the divine being itself. And I know that from my experience that that's how my angelic being is superpositioned at maximum quantity and quality, the divine being itself, but comes to me in a reduced form for me to be able to relate more clearly, spiritually and psychologically, psychically to the divine being. And so as you were talking about your divine owl, I was seeing light. I was seeing the divine being coming to you in the form of an owl. But for some reason, and who knows why, it's your guide manifesting to you. That anyway, that's
Love
where.
it. No. It's not anyways. That's very powerful, and I don't know if you're conscious of it or not. First of all, I totally agree with you. The divine comes to us, reaches out to us, connects to us in the way that we are able to receive it. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean that it's only that form, only that appearance. It means in what manner would I be most comfortably welcomed and understood and received by this person? And I never knew this, but in the Vedic scriptures, that is, I wish I could get all the exact terms right, but the supreme, the supreme Brahma says, I come to them as they are able to receive me best. And you just said that. Now, I'm sorry that I'm not versed enough in the Vedas to know the exact verse and all that kind of stuff, but somebody out there does, and maybe they'll post it for me here on the, in the comments. But yeah, definitely. I have such a powerful affinity. I absolutely love my white owl, aumakua, as it's called in Hawaiian, spirit guide. In the Hawaiian culture, the aumakua is generally for clans or families,
Hmm.
entire families. You would almost think of it as the way ancient European families would have a crest or the family shield. It in that way, this is the spirit that we have recognized is aligned with us, and it might be shark, it might be owl, it might be the honu, the sea turtle, which I also have a very beautiful affinity with. I almost tend to think of the white owl as a little more of the masculine and the green sea turtle as a little more of the feminine. But of course, they both contain both. But my connection with the white owl is irrefutable, very powerful, very solid, and I love it. I absolutely love it. In the Christian tradition, we have the white dove
Hmm.
symbolizing the Holy Spirit because when John the Baptist baptized the Christ in the river, the scripture says that the Holy Spirit descended upon him like a dove. We
Hmm.
don't know that it meant it looked like a dove. Maybe it fluttered down upon, and so I don't know. But with me, that's the equivalent of my white dove, is that white owl. And the more you learn about the traits and characteristics and abilities and virtues of the owl, you gotta love it. Can turn its head something like 270 or more degrees, 200, almost 360. I might have that number wrong, but almost all the way around. can see piercingly clear through the dark night, can hear little mice and voles and things that it hunts incredibly far away, could hear a mouse hiccup 2 miles away, that kind of thing. Um, Sees deeply and clearly and far into what most of us can't or don't. And so the owl for me is all about seeing and thus understanding way deeper than is common.
As you were talking, I was thinking, and Jesus went to get baptized in the River Jordan, and a white owl descended upon his shoulder like the Holy Spirit. And so I make this equation in my experience, from my experience, that the descent of the prana or the divine energy or the Holy Spirit, as we were talking about, comes to us in many forms, and that the dove landing on his shoulder in the scriptures is much more metaphoric than it is literal,
Yeah, of course.
because it's super hard to talk about what we're talking about because you can't talk about it with words. So we have to like piece together all these parts around the thing. And actually, here's a tidbit for people. The word theology means talk about God, around God, talk around it, not at it. You can't really talk at it ever.
Yeah. And that alludes to, the Tao Te Ching. Um, the Tao that can be spoken about is not the eternal Tao. You can't. And in Zen, they say that as soon as you begin to describe something, you've moved away from it.
Yep.
And that's just the nature of language and the realm of intellect. These things are not, they are not for that realm. The realm of the intellect is for analyzing, measuring, transacting, assessing. It's not for these things. And when we live in our heads, so to speak, we get into a whole lot of trouble and massive confusion, which exhausts and frustrates us and tends to have us throw in the towel with these kind of things. And that's why in some of my previous videos, I've mentioned we must, metaphorically speaking, poetically, we must live from the heart. What that means is we must live from that infinite, eternal, divine connection within us, who we are, and from where we come, and where we belong, and where we return. Live from there. That is the Buddha nature. That is the Christ consciousness. But especially, well, it's most of the world now. Let's just say the developed modern world. It's beyond Western world at this point. The trend or the encouragement is to live up here in the what
Mhm.
I'll call the ego intellect, the intellectual uh, center, living your life from there. Well, that is Antichrist. That is not what belongs on the throne and hierarchy of our being. The Antichrist is there. And maybe that's why, symbolically, allegorically, metaphorically, with imagery, maybe that's why uh, the crucifixion was at the place of the skull.
Interesting.
There's many facets that can reveal a
Mm.
piece of understanding to us, as long as we don't get caught up in the intellectualizing of it, but rather come from the knowing spirit rather than the overanalyzing intellect in all things spiritual.
Especially because it, as you described the brain, and I agree with everything you just said, the brain is so clever at producing a spiritual trap. It is the egoic mind wants to go to bring spirituality into the head, and what happens when that happens is that it ignores the most important part of the intellect, which is the heart. And this is the place, the seat of our connection to our original selves, to our higher selves, to the divine being. When we live in this place, then we put our analytical mind to work for us, for this part of ourselves, as opposed to it going to work for itself and blocking this
Yeah,
access.
yeah. Well, as we've heard it said before, the mind is a wonderful servant and a tyrannical master. And I want to quote Jamie Cato, if I can do this off the top of my head. We are, each of us, a wise guru in charge of a mental patient. So I just love him for that.
I
Because
love that.
boy, who can't relate to that? How many, especially we as, let's just say those who sort of trend towards a more spiritual focus of living, we'll call it that. How many of us have not had many experiences where we've taken a step back and thought, I'm going nuts. I'm going nuts. Am I crazy? And I think
Mm.
in today's world, if you're highly and well functioning with the system that we're living in now, that's a red flag. In other words, if you feel like you're nuts, it might be that you're not functioning in an insane world, an insane system. Because if you were, flowing along swimmingly with how everything is going, gosh, you're kind of part of that. And I think our world is ailing. I think our world is in a profound state of disconnect, discord, and disharmony. I think it's obvious. And I think we need to get out of our heads and into the core of our being, move to where we actually are, and let the mind become our servant. It's a wonderful servant and a tyrannical master. But when we can make that shift and don't live up here anymore, but live from within our core, I think everything is going to start to take on a different appearance and meaning and understanding to us. And I think it's a big step in the right direction to do so.
I think so too. And I think that the question from lots of people is, how does one do that? And how does one do that in a practical way while living their life in that world, in the human world of commercialism and technology and politics and religion and culture? How does one find a space and cultivate a space inside oneself where heaven becomes present now in a way that allows that to become the center of one's being, so that the mind is following, other than the instead of the other way around? And all through the literature, all from the east to the west and the top to the bottom, they all teach singleness of mind, oneness, pursuit. And it seems counterintuitive, but after my NDE, what I found helped me over all these decades integrating into the world was not trying to manipulate or work inside the world, but the opposite. I found myself integrating and being able to function more easily in the world by going back inside the oneness itself. And when I take my self identity away from my false self, from my egoic mind, and focus in my breath and my practice internally toward the oneness of being, emptying my mind on a regular practice, moment by moment by moment, breath by breath, I find that my integration into the world, my capacity for having my mind serve my heart, increases tenfold and easily as a result of it. I don't have to work at it. It comes naturally from the practice of the journey inward, which is actually the journey outward. Because once you change this part inside yourself, once you access, uh, and I don't mean access, I mean main connection to, practice a connection to the divine being of yourself, inside yourself, who is yourself, then it automatically relates to the divine beings around you: owls, chickadees, sharks, turtles, trees, flowers, human beings. And so then the MO isn't trying to manipulate how to behave in the world with spirituality. The MO is, how do I coincide the divine being in terms of relate to the world? It's less work than people think it is, and because you don't have to manipulate 10,000 things, you only have to aim for one thing. It's very, very simple.
You're reminding me of the verse in the Gospel of Thomas, which is my favorite of all the canons in the Christian Bible, and it was tossed out, which makes me like it more. But it says, the reason I love the book of the Gospel of Thomas is because there's no Thomas in it. There, there's no presence of him in
Mm.
it. There's no ego. He just says, the Christ said this, the Christ said that. He just puts the pithy quote out there. Jesus said, when you make the two one, you will become sons of man. And when you
Hmm.
say mountain, move away, it will move away. In other words, when the division, the dichotomy, the duality of your being can be fused together in harmony with one, as one. When you align your intellect, your mind, and your will, because your will is optional, you have the right to oppose the divine will. You have that right. Um, the supreme being, Godhead, does not force you. You are invited and welcome. But if you choose to oppose and reject, good luck with that. But you have the right. You have the right to do it, but enjoy the consequence of that, because life's going to be a mess. But when there's so many different ways of understanding what the two are, but when the division is unified, then we are in total flow state. Then we are living instruments of the divine flow stream that we exist from and for. And then we become the instruments of the divine will, which is pure love. That's why we exist. It's what we are.
It
Now,
doesn't take away our suffering. It doesn't stop the turmoil in our lives, the bill that needs to be paid, the workers outside your house making noise when you're trying to sleep. It doesn't stop these things. It allows us to accept them for what they are and the moment that they're there, because and it removes the sting of it. It still hurts, but it removes the sting of it, because when one is in this flow state, one is in the divine presence, which is the eternal nature. And so the temporality of living becomes a little less burdensome and a lot more clear.
well,
When,
sure,
and,
because you're functioning from a far greater absolute anchor point. Here is the
Mhm,
temporal, ever-changing locus, that we're occupying right now, that we've incarnated into. But it isn't the all. It isn't the is that is
mm-mm,
beyond all time, beyond all measurement, beyond all comprehension, from which we have arisen and to which we are rooted. But we can, and we often do consistently, forget or become distracted and disengage. I won't say we can become separate, because we can't become separate, but we can function as if we are separate,
mhm.
de facto, by disengaging or letting that connection falter or fizzle. And then we tend to move up into the head and try and figure things out from there, because we've lost the connection. And I don't think it can be said too many times how important connectivity, constant connectivity, I will even say in a more personal and affectionate way, constant communion
Hmm.
within us is. And then from there, navigate through life in the world.
Exactly. And there does come a point, or there may come a point, I should say, where that connectivity has been so cultivated. A person has dug a deep enough tunnel, pulled down enough veils, uh, so that the flow state remains a constant. Even when one switches up into one's head, the flow state remains in and of itself its own presence, and that is experiential, and it can come through meditative practice of some kind. It can come through other ways as well, or in some combination. but there is a state in which heaven becomes here now, and the efforting toward the cultivation of it becomes easier because it feeds itself, and the more it feeds itself, the bigger the space becomes, and then the connection is not only inside ourselves, but it manifests itself around us like a bubble. It connects ourselves to its own self in the world. And when that happens, it again, it doesn't take away the suffering of life and the things you need to do and the kitchen you have to clean. Um, but it does
You've seen
keep
my
the flow
kitchen, huh?
state. I've seen my own, um, which I can say right now is clean. I know it is
I always
because I
say I
did
have
it
a
this
dish
morning.
full of sinks. Yeah. I'm sorry to cut you off there, but that funny thought I just want.
It's funny.
Yeah.
It's totally funny. Humor is great. Uh, so it can be like a tap opening inside oneself to let the flow through. We were talking about before we came on air, the practicality of spirituality and the practicality of wisdom. And it might seem that living a mystical life is not practical at all, but actually, there's a practicality in that you become a peace bearer to the world around you that arises naturally from you. And so, as you develop this space inside yourself for the presence of the divine, instead of reacting to people I was driving in Utah recently, and it has like a 6-lane highway, and somebody cut me off, and then he flipped me off. And I'm like, what did I do? I didn't do anything. Then I started getting a little angry at this guy, and then I realized that it was connecting to all my past angers of being disrespected. And then I went back inside my space that is always inside myself, and once I'm back inside my space, inside myself, I can breathe in that anger and breathe out peace toward this person and wash away my own anger and wash away my response so that, and that if this happened in an interpersonal, like face to face way, then my response to this person, I might have a flash of physical emotion. There are chemistries that happen inside of us when we have encounters that are negative toward us, but we can clear that away and then respond with a very peaceful approach. And that doesn't mean you allow yourself to be bullied or to be run over. It means that you're not responding to their anger and feeding back into their tape loop, into their feedback system. And so you're actually impacting their lives, that person's life, and the people around you in a way that so instead of, and I imagine this bar fight, somebody spilling a beer on somebody and somebody pushing back, and pretty soon fists are flying. Spill a beer on you, take a breath, step away, recognize that it was an accident and that it was no insult meant to you. And then the bar remains quiet for the rest of the night. There's been no brawl. It's a powerful thing.
You remind me of two scenes in scriptural history. The Buddha was asked, I'll paraphrase the question: how do I handle people that are offending, assaulting, and insulting me, etc., throwing shade?
Yeah.
And the Buddha responded with, if someone offers a gift and the person does not accept it, to whom does the gift return? And the metaphor or the analogy is, imagine the gift is that ball of yuck energy that's brewing in that person for whatever reasons it is, and
Mm-hmm.
they're very glad to throw a big glob of it at you. But if
Mm-hmm.
you just don't catch it, you dodge it Matrix style, just dodge it, just don't accept it, to whom does it yet still belong? At least don't latch onto it and take it. You don't have to you don't have to accept every invitation to a battle that you receive. Now, there's some that are righteous and good, and you should. But in the most cases, like you said, somebody spills their beer on you because they're being drunk and careless, but they weren't deliberately looking to harm you. But your choice of, first of all, step away. Second, pause. Third, take a breath. That can be enough. And
Mm-hmm.
the second imagery that you reminded me of is when the Christ was crucified, the allegory of the two thieves to his left and right. And one of them continued in bitterness, anger, unforgiveness, and rage and whatever at his fate.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it was understandable, but that's how he chose to respond and receive it. And then the other, whose name was Dismas, repented, saw what he had done, stepped back from it, saw the higher understanding, was receptive to it. And what was said to him by the Christ? Verily, I tell you, this day you shall enter into paradise together with me. I will meet you in paradise. You will reach that higher level. I'll see you there. In other words, congratulations, you have transcended the emotional, egoistic, victimhood,
Mm-hmm.
anger-based reaction to what has happened. You've transcended it. Congratulations. I'll see you on the other side. You know, and so, and these things are beautiful and poetic and all that, but sometimes it's really hard. I mean, somebody cuts you off and then flips you off. Well, some people would want to hit the gas and chase that person down and give them a good going over, but don't avoid that at all costs. But it's also understandable that somebody would be, let's say, immediately triggered.
Mm.
The self says no way, but you have to, as you counseled, step back, pause, take a breath, not just a breath, breathe in, you know, the good, let out the bad, or release the anger in your exhalation, and or breathe out peace to them. You can also do that
Mm.
with Reiki. If you
Mm-hmm.
see, you have to, the prime directive, you must always respect free will. You do not have the right to send your energy and do things to people without them permitting you. You actually don't have the right to do that. But if there is a case where, let's say, for example, in the car next to you, there was a parent who was freaking out in a rage and beating their children in the back seat and everything. Yeah, go ahead and send a beam, a wave of pure divine love in a style of Reiki. Go ahead and send that to them and bless them. I think that's totally okay to do that. And I and also my friend Bob have done things like that and seen it go, go ahead and be the conduit of divine love that you are, without meddling and interfering in cases like that at all. Just send it. When you see discord, disruption, conflict, hatred, violence happening, if it's appropriate, send a beam of that out to those people. Just similar to the way that if an ambulance races by you, you say a little prayer for the victim, or I
Mm-hmm.
should say the patient.
Mm-hmm.
It's that kind of a thing. But don't just think it. Send it out to them directly from you. Just a thought of, what can I do? Well, that's something we can do. Um, Peter, I will confess that I am personally struggling very much with how the world is now. I will also confess that I personally believe it's going to get a lot worse. And I'm not one of the airy fairy woo woo types who say, well, don't worry, Mercury's out of retrograde next week, and there's going to be a whole new gleaming, shimmering, beautiful golden earth in about 2 weeks. And maybe at some point, but I don't see that happening in a flash, and I don't see that happening before things get darker. I'm being honest and telling you that that's how I'm feeling. That's what I sense. Um, for that reason, I've gone into high gear with trying to produce and share content on the channel as sort of a wave, sending a wave out as my contribution of energy and what I can offer to the collective, even if
Mm-hmm.
it's pitiful. But whatever I can offer, I'm trying hard to offer now. I'm struggling, and I also know that I'm not alone by any means. How do we deal with a world in which we see essentially global enslavement as the agenda? Global destruction and global enslavement, taking away everything you've had, making everything you need impossibly difficult to have, restricting everything you do, everywhere you can go, the corralling and enslavement of the human species by other humans. We'll just say the cabal, that kind of thing. You know, I find this hard, and um, I'm concerned to some extent. Let's just say it's a concern of mine to not get not get unwisely entangled and caught up in accruing negative karma here in this realm under these circumstances at the expense of, if that's even a thing, but at the expense of the reality I will experience when I depart this body in this world. I know that's huge. I know that's deep. I know that's vast. I know that's also vague. But what say you to that?
Well, I have good news and less than good news.
Yeah.
So the good news is that the balance point really is inside oneself, and the more one develops an access and connection, and is able to stay in the flow, the more heaven becomes present here and now. And then from that place arises non-attachment. And non-attachment allows one to be in the world, as Paul says, and not of the world. And that alone, attachment to eternity, allows one to see the entrance and the exit of life for my own self, my birth and my death, and my departure from this temporal place. So there's no entrapment here, not for anybody, not for whatever happens in the history of the world, whatever happened in the history of the world, or whatever will happen in future human history. You're not here forever. You're here temporarily, and there's light. You are this light inside yourself. And when you develop the capacity, or a capacity is allowed to develop inside oneself, of a reconnection to this light that is you, then it makes the burden of being human easier and more endurable. That's part one. Part two, good news, is that there is a new thing under the sun, and that is that there are tens of millions of near-death experiencers who have been brought back through medical science all over the world. It's not just what we used to call the Western world. It's the modern industrialized world where medical technology has spread globally. There are hundreds of millions of near-death experiencers, all coming back with their own individual experience, but also all coming back, or at least 70% by measure, according to a study that came out last year at the Bigelow Foundation for Consciousness Studies. The 70% of us use two words: love and light. There is a magnification of the direct presence of the divine light in transformed lives, radically transformed lives all over the world, emanating a much larger bubble of light around the planet. And this gives all the rest of the people who haven't had an NDE, but have had significant mystical experiences, transformative spiritual experiences that set them on the course of the light. This all magnifies together. There's more people like that latter group who have visitations from owls, say, or the dead, say. And that group is up to 60% of mourners. 60% of mourners have an after death visitation, after death communication that transforms their grief. So there are hundreds of millions of us now, and we're all talking to each other. You were talking about your little channel here. I used to go to Greek Orthodox Church, and in the Greek Orthodox Church on Good Friday, there is a candle procession, on Saturday night at midnight, there's an Easter Mass service where everybody lights a candle. One little candle doesn't light the room, but 100 or 200 candles makes the whole place luminary. And that luminousness of the planet gives us an opportunity, a chance to nudge, not through force, but merely by finding a way to connect inside ourselves and connect with others like ourselves. That's the good news. That's the first time in history that there's been so many of us, especially now with the capacity for communication around the world. I mean, we're on different continents, you and I, right now. And the bad news is, of course, is that everything that you listed, and that's not new news. That's ancient human tribalism, and it's tribalism is always about the concentration of power for the well-being of your group, whoever they are, and that is human nature. I and it's much more complicated than just the oligarchies that exist around the world. It's AI, it's quantum computing in conjunction with AI, it's uh, climate catastrophe. I have a hurricane coming right down our alley right now, and it's going to be here in 2 days. It's not going to be a big hurricane, but they're infrequent where we live. Our Gulf is warming here. The water is rising here. Our tides are higher here. There are southern fish coming up the coast. Our northern fish are headed up to the Arctic. There's a shift going on in the weather and in the climate that's potentially going to create um, human migration over the next 70 years. We get a lot on our plate right now as humanity, but we have this inner thing that is who we are inside ourselves. And the more of us that talk about this in public, the crazy thing is about the 60% of mourners who have after death visitation is nobody dares to talk about it in public. Heck, they hardly even talk about it to their families. I had this conversation with this guy just the other day, and he said, I started watching near death experiences, and I grew up kind of near this guy. We had some interaction when we were kids, and then my grandma came to me in a dream, and I didn't talk about it. And then when I mentioned it to my mom 2 years later, and she said, "Oh, her mom came to her in a dream," and then they mentioned it at dinner.
Yeah,
It turns out the sister.
yeah. Peter, let me throw this in on the same point. When my grandmother died, my mother's mother, it wasn't soon after that my mother and I both had identical visitations on the exact same night. And I came
That's what I'm
down for
talking
breakfast in
about.
the morning. Yeah, I came down for breakfast in the morning and I said, Mom, I got to tell you, Grandma came to me last night and she came and she said this and she gave me a big hug and it was unbelievable. And it wasn't a dream, it was her. And my mother just dropped the dishes and said, Oh, I had the same thing. And I'm like, well, because it happened.
Yeah.
It happened. And I can tell you that I've had 4 or 5 visitation encounters, we'll just call them generally, of
Hmm.
someone who has, left their body, someone who has what we say died.
Hmm.
I've had them, but the most powerful, exponentially most powerful, was when my girlfriend died. And I won't get into that story right now, but I'll tell you that it eliminated any semblance of doubt or wondering if maybe I'm fooling myself about. No, that's all gone. No more intellectual mind games in that category anymore after that happened. And I
It
mean,
gives you.
I knew she died before I was told. I sensed her. I don't mean to be crude, but I sensed her disembodiment. I sensed that she had left her body and she was out of it. And I said, I'm going to go home and get the email. I know it. When I go home, the email is waiting. It's already in my inbox. It's waiting. And I went home and there was the email. But I knew before it happened. How did I know before it happened? Connectivity. Because we were so closely connected, I could feel the shift. And then it was that evening that I was positively visited. I'm not going to get into it too much, but just to affirm from my experience the point you're making, that 60%, I believe it's higher than that. Let's say 60% have admitted it.
Well, it's based in a study. I work with this group called the International Association for Near Death Studies. It's a consortium of university professors. And there's a woman named Dr. Marjorie Woollacott who did a study of 350 people, a random study, double blind scientific study. And so it could be higher that people didn't admit it, but 60% is still a huge number of the population because who does not mourn? Even if it's only 60%, who in the world reaches an age where they have not mourned? And of mourners, 60%. And you mentioned it to your mom, and your mom dropped the dishes and had this, oh my God, but she probably wasn't going to tell you, not that morning anyway.
Yeah, it was
Uh,
something very intimate, intimately personal and sacred, and I just happened to say it, and boom, me
and
too.
my point is that that those kinds of same dreams of the person coming to visit happen in families fairly frequently.
Mm,
And it, if people don't talk about it, then nobody knows. Then everybody's carrying this secret
yeah.
of and and it's not the kind of secret that is helpful to you. You might think it's helpful to you because then you won't be thought of as crazy. And I get that. I understand that. I kept my mouth shut for 20 years about my NDE for the only reason of I didn't want to be thought insane. And I thought I had gone crazy in the beginning. I knew this thing happened to me,
Yeah.
but now I'm living in a different world. Now everything's different. What happened to my brain?
Well,
Um,
things are changing now. People that
yes,
have seen cryptids and people that have seen UFOs and all that, it's
I'm a
starting to
UFO
become.
seer.
Yeah, I watched them for a long time in 1984. I watched them. I,
Yep.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you and define what I saw, but I can describe what I saw. But the point is that the taboo is falling off. It's
Yeah.
crumbling, and that's really good. And in that sense, our the internet and everything else is really good because people everywhere can say, "Oh my God, me too." And I didn't think I could, and that applies to so many situations. I thought I was the only one like this. I thought I was the only one that ever saw that. I thought I was the only one that ever experienced this,
Hmm.
that, or the other. And
Hmm.
we now have a platform to achieve, I should say, to arrive at a commonality of experiences, as you're saying.
And so the hope for the world is, from my point of view, is what we're talking about, because politics and economics and social structures have never succeeded in creating one planet with one people. It's always been tribal. The only opportunity I think that we have as a planet is when people in China and in India and Iran and Iraq and Argentina and Japan and the United States, individual people have this, begin to discover this divine access inside themselves and are willing to talk about it in public. I want to create a movement. I know that I'm part of, and I want to encourage a movement of conversation around spiritually transformative experiences, around mystical experiences, where, for instance, a visitation from the dead, because when the CEOs and when the senators begin to admit these things as true to themselves, then we're going to have a larger coalition of individuals of the light. And that, I think, is the only salvation for humanity in our future, is by living through this original self. And that's very difficult to do for a lot of people who've never seen the light. So I see our task is to bring it to the public square, normalize conversations around it in cocktail parties and boardrooms, and then let it do its own work, because the light not only sees itself in other people and reveals its presence in other people, with the same eye wherein I see you in your light, you see me in my light. Not only does it do that, it has this multiplying factor. In the canonical gospels, Jesus says, where two or three are gathered, I am there. The I am multiplies the presence in two or three. In the gospel of Thomas, it says, where one, two, three are gathered. Individuals have a radiant light, and it is a multiplier of in one person. And when two and three and five and 7 million are together, it's a magnification. So even though we're heading into this potential time where we are arming ourselves with hypersonic nuclear missiles and all sorts of other weaponry technologies, robots and AI and all these things, some of which, and I got my fingers crossed. I got my fingers crossed for Star Trek, the utopian future. But you know that in the mythology of Star Trek, they went through a very bad time before that became good.
Well, that's
Um,
exactly what I was alluding to before when I said I don't believe this. Oh, there's going to be an instantaneous fifth dimensional shift of Gaia, and I just, it doesn't feel like that's
maybe,
how. Yeah,
maybe,
but
but
it feels to me like things are going to crumble and collapse in a chaotic and pile of hurt. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
before
You know,
maybe from the ashes, the phoenix and all that. Remember when the phoenix arises from in flames, it's from ashes. So I just
that's
feel that,
right.
Kali, the destroy, I just feel that the destruction happens before the birth of the new. And I think that those of us who are here now, I don't want to sound all, overly dramatic, but it seems very much like we're going to live the beginning of that. And I hope
Yeah.
that it's swift and resolute and over quickly, that we can be the ones who can help to create the new world
Yeah.
after having had enough of all that wasn't working and didn't work out,
Yep.
and that all be gone. But I'm not I'm not Pollyanna about it. I don't get into toxic positivity, as I said. I'm not all woo woo. I'm not into that. I try to just see what I see as it is. Um, by the way, you reminded me of another thing I'd like to share when you said, as the teaching, of the Christ, where two or more are gathered in my name, etc. When we get, um, do you have any experience with speakers, like DJ speakers? All right.
What's a D? I know what a DJ is.
Okay. DJs use speakers. The speakers that pump out the bass sound are called subwoofers.
Yep.
They're putting out the low frequencies, the stuff that you hear 30 blocks away as you're walking to the club. Yeah, that's subwoofers. Did you know that there is an acoustical phenomena? Any DJs out there, here's a tip for you. If you take two subwoofers, normally they are on the left and the right of the
Mm,
DJ's area, more or less, the stage, whatever. Did you know that if you put them side by side, they equal three? So 1 plus 1 equals 3 when you put
mm,
them together. If you put one over
mm.
here and one over here, it's 1 plus 1 equals 2. But if you put them together, it's 1 plus 1 equals 3
That's
acoustically.
interesting.
So that's a phenomena that, I don't know. I smiled when you said that because back in a past life, I may have had some experience as a DJ, believe it or not. So yeah, I remembered that.
That's
And
cool.
it,
I didn't know that about the sound waves with subwoofers.
yeah, it's
Huh.
just another analogy that fits. Oh, that's like this, which I do a lot of that. That's like that.
Hmm.
I always
Metaphors,
relate. Yeah,
they
yeah,
help.
yeah.
So
Um,
we have a potential future of disaster, but a potential future of a remaking of humanity. And people talk about the second coming of Christ. They talk about the end times. They talk about Gaia consciousness. It's already here. It's not something that's coming. It's something that is here now, and it's this very thing that we're talking about. It is already present inside individuals, and it already is magnifying around the globe. NDEers who we don't work our way into heaven. It just kind of happens to us, but we come back like fiber optic cables with a diode on the end, and that
mm,
diode of light is the same illumination around us. And the more of us that are, and this is a trend that's probably going to continue as humanity is more and more able to bring people back from the dead. Uh, it's a trend that's going to continue. So this is not doesn't have an end date. It has a continuation of new near death experiencers coming all the time. So this bubble of light, this is a phenomenon that is going to likely continue through whatever cataclysms or social disorientation comes down the pike. It's here, it's staying, and we have um, a potential now for humanity that we've never had before. Plus, we've never filled the planet before. We've spent the last 200,000 years and previous to that in other hominid forms spreading around the globe, and now we're shoulder to shoulder, and we're all these different Neanderthal and Denisovans and Homo sapien, white and red, and all
Cro-Magnon,
these Cro-Magnon, right? We're all these
Homo
different
floresiensis.
exactly. And we are actually only one people. And because we're one people, as we begin this shift through this next 70-year cycle, whatever, however long it's going to last, um, we can start working across our tribal We're already working across our tribal lines, and that's a thing that's happening through near-death experience. So there's a group in Iran, an International Association for Near-Death Studies group in Iran, Muslims who are actively speaking to the group in Israel, Jews, because NDE is something that erases all barriers. It's a
Well, it's
new
beyond them.
opportunity.
It's way beyond them. And here
Exactly.
on the local, as I said before, this locus, the local limited temporary here and now this is not it all. It's almost like we've inserted into a glove, and this is the glove,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not the whole body that's behind it. And
Mm-hmm.
I respect different tribes. I respect a people's right and sovereignty to their own identity and their own
Oh
boundaries
yeah.
and their own nationality and their own culture and their own religion and their own everything. But we must all respect that for all on that level. But on the higher level, we're not even that anyway, which is why I just shake my head. I get disgusted, but I just like kind of grimace when I see all this stuff about, like identity politics and well, you're in some way different than me. You look different than me. You think differently than me. You're not in the same kind of body as me. And I'm like, everyone is forgetting that we've all been them all.
Well, it's not their fault that they've forgotten, and that the design of the whole system includes forgetting. And
Yeah.
so
Would you call that a mind wipe?
you could call it a mind wipe, but
Yeah.
I would call the mind wipe it insinuates that the mind once before remembered. But as soon as the biology starts to work and the brain starts to function, the brain itself is the veil. So, how do you escape the veil itself when that's what it is? It's your very physical structure, the very physical structure of your beingness. So, if mind is equivalent to original self, then yes. But if mind is equivalent to the thing that functions inside my brain, then no. So I think forgetfulness is a person could rail against the forgetfulness and get angry at the divine for having this, or one could say it's way beyond my understanding, which is what happened to me. I saw the structure of the universe. I saw all the biology and the chemistry and the physics. It was still beyond me, and I had
Yeah.
no brain to filter it through. And so in my human form, I don't even worry about those sorts of
Yeah. Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
I aim instead, mostly because of yeah, 100% because of what happened to me when I was dead, but also because of what I've read globally in the ancient texts, that the avenue for balance in the world is the pursuit of oneness of being. And that includes the quietude, the silencing of the mind as a practice in order to access this higher self. And then when that happens, then the acceptance of other people's culture is a byproduct of that. And then there's no efforting toward that, because one already sees the light of the other person
Yeah.
and sees the physical uh, structures of language and culture as
Yeah.
secondary.
Yeah. Love covers the multitude of sins. If you are being love, there's none of that nonsense going on anyway. You're not seeing people that way, and sometimes it can be challenging. It still can be challenging, but you're just not functioning from a limited, biased, disconnected stance. Love covers the multitude of sins, meaning imperfections, errors, whatever. Um, Peter, you have died and left your body twice, not just once. And you have your own YouTube channel. I'm going to put the links. I highly encourage all viewers to subscribe to Peter's YouTube
Thank you.
channel and check him out. He's a wonderful guy who I loved immediately and can still say I of course do. And in the previous guest appearance that we had, we talked in depth about your NDEs. But in conclusion to our conversation today, is there one nugget of shining, shimmering, pure wisdom that you brought back with you that you could bestow upon us today here in the context of, as I confessed before, people who are struggling to keep their light shining and to keep their divine connection aglow in the backdrop of this craziness that's going on in our world right now.
Rely on the inner space. We're not going to be able to change the world. I can't do anything about the rising tide in my backyard. There's nothing I can do about that. I can cultivate the space inside myself of peace. And by cultivating the space inside myself of peace, by surrendering my egoic mind on a breath by breath, I allow this space to grow inside myself that gives me a footing in the world, but only because it gives me 2 feet in heaven. So if you're struggling, stay on your path, surround yourself with a community of people who are like hearted. The energy of their heart is the same, and you'll feed from them and they will feed from you. But mostly love as much as you can. Love those around you and allow the love to grow inside you. And that's where the source is. That's where your energy comes from. That's who you are. The only way out of here, the only way to deal with here is by going to the original self. And I know that that takes effort. There's no shortcut. It takes practice. I'm sorry about that. I didn't make up the rules. Go inside if you want strength in the world. If you want to see your own end, if you want to know where your beginning is and where your end is, aim your eye toward the eye of the divine and you'll find yourself and the light will continue to come. But you have to keep opening the door. Open the door, open the door, open the door.
I would sum that up with a phrase that came to me a few months ago, and I made an episode about it. Cultivate constant communion.
Mm.
I don't think that anything matters more ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think that we are on the precipice of learning directly just how important that is. And so I would just reflect back in the way that it came to me, your same sentiment, your same message. Cultivate constant communion, cultivate constant communion in the divine. I don't even like to say unity with the divine because that's dualistic. Unity in the divine, being one in the divine. And if anybody knows what that feels like, it's you. And Peter, thank you so much for gracing us with your presence and sharing of yourself and your experiences and your accrued wisdom that you've gathered from those experiences. And once again, I thank all of the viewers who have stayed with us till this point. Thank you. I hope that you can take away from this something very meaningful that you can put into immediate practical practice in your spiritual life. And if you're struggling in any way, as many of us are, I hope that this has helped as a balm for your soul and that you continue it and share it with anyone else who may also receive it well. Peter Panagore, thank you so much again, brother. You are a wonderful, wonderful soul, and I absolutely love you.
Love you too. Peace to you, brother.